Hey guys, Terry Shanahan from the Get Real Challenge. And today we are in for a treat, a huge treat. We got my great buddy, Dr. Tim Jackson, who's going to be joining us and doing some Q&A and teaching us some amazing stuff. Guys, I've been studying this, this industry, these topics for over 12 years, really much longer. It really goes back to college in a way. But I really got introduced to kind of, the paleo lifestyle and functional medicine probably back in 2005. And I've just been kind of, addicted to learning. And I've met a lot of people. I've had a lot of mentors. But I'll tell you that when it comes to gut health and hormones and supplementation and mitochondria function and just all these just super detailed, complicated systems in our body and how they're connected. I've truly never met anybody who knows this stuff like Dr. Tim Jackson does. And so you guys are in for a huge treat to have access to him. He charges a lot of money for this stuff. He's been super generous to do this and to be a guest on this program. And so if you guys have questions, obviously tonight we're going to take questions live, and then you can post questions within the Facebook group. And Dr. Tim does do some coaching and consulting. And so at the end, he maybe we'll have him talk a little bit more about his process for that. But if you guys have questions, like I said, in the future, or if you're listening to the recording, you can definitely post in the Facebook group. He's in there. So without further ado, I want to welcome my great friend and mentor and super sharp guy, Dr. Tim Jackson. Tim, thanks for being on the call tonight.
Hey, Terry, thanks for having me. It's always a treat, and I think we're going to have a good podcast.
Absolutely, buddy. Absolutely. So, Tim, let's just get right into it. You and I have a couple other recordings. I posted, guys, if you like this stuff and you want to geek out on it, I have two other recordings. One of them I shared to my email list a couple weeks ago, and the other one you'll be getting in this course. So, I'm happy to share them with you. In those, Tim talks a little bit more about his story and stuff, but I want to get right to the point tonight and just get rolling. So if you guys want to know more about that, you can listen to some of the recordings. But Tim, let's get right into it. Let's get down to the action. Tell us a little bit, for the person who doesn't know. There's a lot of newbies here in this group. There's a lot of people who are just getting introduced to this lifestyle. They're working out. They're trying to eat real food. They're trying to work on getting better sleep. But can you tell us a little bit just about, like, what is functional medicine? Like, a lot of people don't even know what that means, and you're an expert in that field. So can you just talk a little bit about functional medicine?
Yeah, so functional medicine in general is studying the biochemical and physiological interactions of the body and the different systems of the body. It is not simply taking medications that you may be on or be prescribed and replacing them with supplements. That we have kind of a derogatory term in functional medicine for that called green allopathy. And a lot of people are guilty of it, and you'll see people carrying around grocery bags of supplements. And usually I'm like the 9th or 10th doctor or provider that someone has seen. And, they'll have a list of literally 25 supplements. And so I usually have them just stop all of them, and then we start over and add in one at a time, going very slowly. Because, when you start taking multiple supplements at the same time and you have many variables contributing to your symptoms, you're not sure what's going on. So functional medicine is looking at the interactions, the web-like interactions of the cardiovascular system, the neurological endocrine system, the immune system, the GI tract, and how tinkering with one or imbalances in one can have downstream effects on others. So just to give you a quick example, when we're talking about thyroid hormone, everyone knows our thyroid is responsible for, burning calories and energy, and every cell in our body has a receptor for thyroid hormone. Well, it turns out that T4, which is your inactive thyroid hormone, so it's not the active one, but the inactive one, it gets converted into T3, the active form. You can think of it as like the gas pedal for your body. 20% of that gets converted to T3 in the gut. So you can have a gut infection or a gut pathogen that interrupts or disrupts your thyroid levels. And if your thyroid levels start dropping out of the optimal range, because, and here's a kind of a side point I want people to understand, any lab work that you have done these days, you want to put it into context, because you could be within quote unquote the normal range, if you get blood work done at Quest or LabCorp, but that range normal doesn't mean healthy. So if you compare the ranges from today to say 1970, you'll see drastic differences, and you'll see differences, state to state as well. So, they keep lowering the recommended or optimal amount of cholesterol, or the cholesterol level that you should have. They keep lowering the amount of that's optimal for your red blood cell magnesium. So the point I'm trying to make is that you need to put your results in the hands of someone who knows how to read them, because oftentimes I get people that have spent, $10,000 or more on labs, and they say, oh, the doctor that ordered them said they're normal. And I look at them and, they're nothing close to normal. So you have to be able to interpret things in the context from which they were derived. So those ranges include very sick people. The sample size that they use to calculate those numbers are pretty sick. And so if we waited for your markers to be out of range for all of them, you'd pretty much be in the ICU. So the take-home message there is that, normal and optimal are two very different things. And that's why so many people go to a traditional MD and, complain of fatigue or depression. And they'll say, oh, your lab tests are normal, or they may not even order all the right lab tests. And so, get back to the original question of what is functional medicine, it is getting down to the root causes. And I want to emphasize causes because, coming over from the traditional medical allopathic model, people tend to think, okay, A causes B, and then I'm going to take remedy C to get rid of it. And, that's very linear thinking, and that's not how our body works at all. So, with these interactions, there's going to be multiple contributing factors in terms of what's causing your symptoms. Let's say there's 12 of us, standing in a straight line. If we have, each one of us has the exact same symptoms, the contribution from different organ systems in our body that are contributing to that dysfunction will be different. So for me, 60% of my issue may be in the gut. For you, 40% may be the thyroid. For someone else, 70% may be immune system imbalances. And so it's not getting down to, the one thing. It's getting down to the handful of things that are contributing, finding out the primary and the secondary and the tertiary, and going after them in a systematic fashion.
Awesome. Tim, that's a great explanation. I love it. Now, let me ask you this. So within functional medicine, is there use for medications and supplements and diet and lifestyle? Are all of those a piece of functional medicine, or what pieces are used?
Yeah, it depends on the provider as to, the amount and type of medications that they use, if they use any at all.
Sure.
Sometimes, with certain gut pathogens or systemic pathogens, you could probably get rid of it with supplements, but it'll take a shorter period of time, and you're more likely to be effective at getting rid of it if you go the medication route. So the other thing is that, people think that, oh, just because something's a supplement that it's safe and healthy, and just because something's a medication that it's bad. But, there are medications out there, things like low dose naltrexone, your bioidentical hormones, injectable, amino acids, B vitamins, that just because they're a prescription, doesn't make them bad. And, especially in the short term, a lot of times there's a need in the acute time frame to use medications to get someone out of a hole, because and this relates perfectly to your group. I get a lot of people that they are doing really, really well in their diet and exercise, but they still have X, Y, or Z issue. And what I tell them is, that you definitely got to do the diet and exercise part, or the nutrition and exercise part. But once you have an issue like an infection or a toxicity issue, then it's going to take some sort of therapeutic modality or intervention, whether that's supplements or, getting in the far infrared sauna or another type of intervention. So, yeah, to answer your question, there's definitely room for and the incorporation of different medications in functional medicine. Typically, more of the compounded medications would be included in that.
Awesome. Awesome. And Tim, so, within this course, we're starting with nutrition. We're working our way into movement and lifestyle. I'm giving them kind of the basics on gut health and hormones and toxicity. Certainly not the level of detail that you take with somebody, but
Right.
starting at the very beginning, how can food or nutrition, what we put in our mouth, how can that affect, all these things that you're talking about? Like, I mean, obviously that's not where you spend the majority of your time, but
Yeah.
why is that important for somebody who's listening to this?
Well, if you think about it, in order to understand how our body works, we have to understand how our cells work, because our organ systems, like the cardiovascular system, the neurological system, they're all made up of cells. And so if the cells don't function well, then the tissues don't function well. And if the tissues don't function well, your organ systems don't function well. And then you start getting symptoms and issues in multiple different systems of the body. So in terms of diet, let's say someone's eating a traditional standard American diet. The different contaminants, especially glyphosate from Roundup, that people get, that can really wreak havoc on your gut microbiome, which is, the good bacteria in your large intestines. And it acts synergistically, meaning, kind of together, they, have a stronger effect with aluminum. And, aluminum is a commonly toxic heavy metal that's found in, pretty much all of us, from vaccines to contaminated food to deodorant, etc. But the way that food affects your body is going to be through, are you adding any bad things to it? Number one. And number two, are you adding enough of the good things? So, a lot of dietitians or registered dietitians I talk to, they say, oh, there's no reason for anyone to supplement. They can get all their nutrients from a diet. Well, I know people that eat nothing but organic 24/7 for years, and they're still deficient, because if the soil's deficient, your food's going to be deficient. So there's some supplements, people say, oh, well, do we really need all these supplements? Well, things like magnesium and zinc, omega-3s, yeah, you're going to need those, because number one, anytime your body's under any sort of stressor, spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, you're going to excrete those minerals and vitamins and use them up, burn through them at a higher rate than you normally would. And so, the question again is, are we adding bad stuff to the body? Are we adding enough of the good stuff? And then food, you want to think about food as information to your cells. And so, your mitochondria, which are the battery packs of your cells, they're what drive everything. So they give you the energy to go to the gym, but they also are needed for all systems in your body to function. So one of the red flags that you'll see in someone that has symptoms in many different systems of the body, the common denominator is that they have mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's a buzzword. It'll make it into regular medicine probably in 10 years or so. But my mentor has written, a whole book on it. And it's more than just like, okay, boost your mitochondria and you'll have more energy to exercise. Your mitochondria, when they start to dysfunction, you create inflammation. And then that inflammation further damages your mitochondria. So eating a high carbohydrate diet is one more surefire way to damage the mitochondria.
Gotcha.
Okay, and so that's another primary way that diet is going to affect how your body works, how your cells work, and ultimately how your organs work. The other thing is looking at, macronutrient composition. If we don't have enough fatty acids, our cell membranes lose their integrity, and the membranes of our mitochondria, again, which are the batteries of our cells, lose their integrity. And when that happens, your cells can't talk to each other like you and I are having a conversation now. And if your cells can't talk to each other, that means your organ systems can't function. So everything starts to shut down. So that's why, if we wrote down on a dry erase board, every syndrome, disease, disorder, and symptom we could think of, the common denominator would be mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's why, people take things like CoQ10, L-carnitine. That's one avenue of boosting your mitochondria. But to kind of summarize, food, are we getting enough of the good stuff in? Are we adding any bad stuff that, is going to further slow down our detox pathways? And then are we eating a diet that will give us the optimal hormonal profile? So insulin obviously is released when you have high blood sugar. So if you're eating a lot of high glycemic foods and desserts, you're going to get, surges of insulin released, and insulin causes a ton of inflammation in the body, and it promotes the deposition of plaque in your arteries. And so you have to, address all those issues. So diet, is very important, and the first step you should make. And it's basically, think of it as hormonal information or just overall information that you're sending to your cells. And that kind of gets into gut health, because every nutrient in your body, with the exception of oxygen, has to come through the gut. So if there's gut dysfunction, then that's going to affect every cell from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet.
Wow. Awesome. I'm taking notes here, guys. I hope you guys are too. I get all geeked up about this stuff. I love learning from Tim. Tim, this is incredible info. Thank you. And I think you're talking. I know you got to dumb it down for people like us, but you're talking at a great level. I think we're following. So, let me ask you this, Tim. So, okay. So we're kind of connecting all the dots. You're connecting all the dots here. Let's talk about, okay, so in this program, we talk, we primarily, probably 70% of it to 80% of it is nutrition. And then we touch on, gut health a little bit, hormones a little bit, sleep, stress, inflammation, toxicity. But do you want to go a little bit deeper? There's definitely people in the program who have some health issues. Okay. I think, gut health, digestion is an issue. Hormones, thyroid and other hormonal things are an issue. And then I'd say maybe the other one that I think a lot of people have experienced at some point in the group is maybe some depression or anxiety. So
Sure.
That's a lot of stuff I just threw out there. But would you mind talking about how, I think, a lot of it starts in the gut, obviously. But do you, assuming that you agree with that, do you want to talk about like how gut health then affects hormones and then could affect neurologically, like how we feel? Like how are those all connected?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to point out is that, it's kind of gotten out there pretty well that, if you fix the gut, you can heal a lot of other things. But I want people to understand that it also works the other way. The pathway is bidirectional. So you can have good gut health or optimal gut health, but let's say you have a systemic virus or some sort of pathogen that causes an inflammatory response in your body. Those inflammatory compounds can punch little holes in your gut lining. So it's not as easy as saying, okay, let's optimize your gut and we'll optimize everything else and it'll fix itself. You really have to look at both directions of the pathway. So in studies on rats, if you lesion certain parts of the brain, it will interfere or disrupt certain parts of your gut microbiome, which is just, the collective term for the good bacteria and the commensal bacteria in your large intestines. So when we're talking about the gut health overall and how it can affect things, well, number one, like I mentioned before, every nutrient in the body, with the exception of oxygen, has to come through the gut. So if you have impaired absorption, it's going to affect nutrient delivery to all the different systems in the body. Number two, different types of pathogens, especially gram-negative bacteria, release a highly inflammatory compound called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. And actually, in studies on rats, when they want to create inflammation in them, that's what they do, is they inject them with these LPS. So that directly creates an inflammatory response throughout the body systemically, and could lead to things like joint pain. And though the inflammatory response is created, those inflammatory markers will punch little holes in the barrier around your brain called the blood-brain barrier. And when that happens, things that should not be given access to the brain now can activate different types of cells in the brain, which lead to toxicity issues or overly excited cells, and that can lead to neurodegeneration. That's why they call the gut, the second brain. But that pathway, is important, like I said, because you can have certain pathogens releasing endotoxins into the bloodstream, and that can cause a systemic inflammatory response, resulting in things like fatigue and brain fog, but also depression and anxiety and mood issues. It can also lead to reduced levels of methylfolate, some of the B vitamins, and vitamin K2, since those are created by the good bacteria in the gut. And then another way that the gut can affect overall health is that there's a direct blood supply from our colon, which is our large intestine, to the liver. And what happens is when we have certain pathogens present, they create these toxins, the lipopolysaccharides, and they overburden or overwork the liver detox pathways. And so it starts to shut down it's called phase one detox pathways, which is the first portion of the detoxification cascade that environmental compounds and endogenous compounds have to go through in order to be processed. The last way that I can think of off the top of my head is like one that I mentioned earlier, where 20% of your T4, your inactive thyroid hormone, is converted to T3 in the gut. And so if there's a dysbiosis in the gut, or malabsorption or inflammation or some other imbalance, then your thyroid hormone levels can be affected. The one last thing would be that I mentioned how the liver can get overloaded with these different toxins from pathogens in the gut. Well, 60% of your T4, again, your inactive thyroid hormone, is converted to T3, the gas pedal for your body, in the liver. So if you have a messed up gut, it's going to lead to messed up liver and a messed up thyroid.
Wow. Unreal. I love how you connect all that stuff. That's incredible. Now, a lot of people hear the word inflammation and they think of like, a sports injury, or they think of, somebody with arthritis, and people who have inflammation know this very well. But explain how, people, may be very inflamed and not even know it. Like, is that a possibility? Like there's silent inflammation, correct? Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah. Talk
Absolutely.
a little bit about that.
Yeah. So a lot of times, it's kind of like, I make the analogy, it's a psychological analogy. Let's say someone in your family passes away. Well, usually, your other family members and your friends are going to kind of rally around you and support you and help you through that time. But the daily stressors that you experience, getting stuck in traffic, arguing with your spouse, worrying about finances, you don't really get as much support about those types of issues. So those are the ones that happen. It's not one big event that happens, but these small little events that occur day in and day out that over time cause inflammation. And most people are, like you said, can be inflamed and not even know it until their inflammation goes down. And they're like, whoa, okay, I feel different. And, you know, I have that happen to a lot of people that they may have some musculoskeletal or body aches and pains, but when we address the other issues that are at the root cause, those things go away. So, you know, in terms of the silent inflammation, you know, there's many different ways. When we say inflammation, you can basically think of it in the same context as oxidative stress, which, if your audience isn't familiar, so oxidative stress are just free radicals. You know, you always hear about the free radicals, and that's why they're advertising all those anti-aging creams and things on TV and such. And so inflammation and free radicals, not only do they disrupt your cellular, the orchestration of different events, like the folding of proteins and the transcription or reading of some of your genes, but they can affect a whole lot of other things, especially in terms of the mitochondria. And again, I'm going to keep coming back to the mitochondria because they're so important. So, you know, if you want to think of someone that has really, really good mitochondrial health, think of someone who won an Olympic gold medal. If you want to think of someone with really bad mitochondrial health, think of someone with symptoms in every system of their body. So, you know, that gives you an analogy. And the issue that comes up is that, let's say you have a certain pathogen that's activated in the body and your immune system mounts this inflammatory type reaction. Well, those molecules will damage the mitochondria. The mitochondria are very sensitive to oxidative stress. And this gets into, I don't want to use too many highly scientific terms, but glutathione, which is our body's main antioxidant, and another antioxidant called superoxide dismutase, or SOD, they are normally, they kind of sit in front of the mitochondria and they absorb the bullets from the inflammatory cascade. The problem is that every toxin, let's say I go for a walk down the street, you know, and there's lots of traffic, every toxin that I'm exposed to is using up some of my glutathione. If I'm under a lot of stressors, that's going to use up more of my glutathione. And then there's the potential for you to have a polymorphism, which is kind of like a lighter version of a mutation, where you don't make as much glutathione as you normally would like to, or you should optimally. And so when those levels are low, it makes the mitochondria more susceptible to damage from the inflammation. And then once the mitochondria are damaged from that inflammation, they actually create more reactive oxygen species or free radicals. And so it just becomes this self-perpetuating cycle and, you know, continues over and over. And the first step to healing anything, no matter what you're talking about, is to correct or at least calm down inflammation. Inflammation, you know, it's necessary in the acute phase. You know, that's what keeps us alive, helps us heal from injuries and things like that. But it's this long-term, low-level chronic inflammation that, you know, is usually caused from a combination of environmental toxicity, gut dysbiosis, hormone imbalances, a number of different things, neurotransmitter imbalances. And so, you know, the inflammatory cascade or silent inflammation, you may not have the classical signs or symptoms of inflammation, you know, like redness or swelling, or increased temperature, or, you know, warmness of the joints, but you may have fatigue or brain fog or insomnia. And so I want you to kind of I want everyone to broaden their definition of, you know, inflammation. And, you know, so how do you kind of control that inflammation? Well, in the long term, you know, you want to go after the different root causes, whether it's a combination of gut issues, toxic metals, pathogens, things of that nature. But in the short term, you know, it's okay to use things like turmeric or curcumin. Fish oil can help. A number of other compounds, boswellia, can help to calm down, you know, the low-level inflammatory response, and CBD is also very good at that.
Awesome. Awesome. Tim, I'm gonna prompt, you said you see that was an amazing explanation of inflammation. And I say that a lot in posts, and I don't think people really grasp like what I'm referring to. And so you did a great job of explaining that. You mentioned inflammation, you mentioned superoxide dismutase, you mentioned glutathione, and you mentioned oxidative stress. And so there's a lot of people in the group who've used the supplement Protandim. And I've talked about that a little bit in a future presentation. We'll get a little bit more into that. But at the end, I'm gonna ask you, about some of your favorite supplements. But I think this would be a great time to maybe mention Protandim, because Protandim has been shown to increase superoxide dismutase, increase glutathione, reduce oxidative stress. Do you mind just commenting on that a little bit? And obviously, it has curcumin in it as well, which you mentioned.
Yeah, so it's good. Curcumin, one of the things, it's better than fish oil, And the reason I say that is, they do different things, but curcumin works on the gene level in terms of, genes don't usually get completely turned off or on. It's more like the volume gets adjusted. And curcumin works on something, it's called NF-kappa beta, if anyone wants to know, but it's a transcription factor, which just means it reads or translates our DNA to make certain proteins. Well, this particular transcription factor tells your body to make inflammatory compounds. And I don't mean just one, I mean like 20 something. And then, those cause their own inflammation and have their own individual effects as well. So when you have inflammation, oxidative stress, it hijacks your cells from doing the job they would normally do, daily maintenance. And, like I said before, in order to understand how our bodies work, you have to understand how a cell works. And that's why I got really into, biochemistry and cell biology, because I'm like, this is really what it's at, where it's at if you're trying to think through things. And other things that oxidative stress can do, the list goes on and on. It's really at the heart of every symptom out there. But, like I said, it can damage the mitochondria. If you have enough oxidative stress and inflammation, it will interfere with cortisol levels. It'll cause your cortisol to go up. And then when cortisol goes up, then insulin goes up. So now you're starting to affect your metabolic pathways from something that really started out completely non-metabolic. And so in terms of the Protandim and the nutrients in there, they're working on multiple pathways. It's not just like let's take this supplement for this symptom or this inflammatory molecule. The curcumin and the other compounds in there are upregulating the antioxidant defense mechanisms in your body. And I think, doesn't Protandim also increase catalase?
It does, yeah. It's been shown in peer-reviewed studies to increase catalase, superoxide dismutase, and glutathione. Glutathione by 300%, SOD, I think, by 54%, and catalase by, I don't recall the number, but it's significant. All of them are very significant.
Yeah, so all those enzymes are extremely important. You can, of course, supplement with glutathione individually, but superoxide dismutase is one that you can supplement with that individually as well, but there aren't a lot of good forms of that supplement available. So giving, nutrients that indirectly raise it can be very helpful. And again, I mentioned polymorphisms earlier. You can have polymorphisms where you don't make as much glutathione as you should. You can also have polymorphisms where you don't make as much superoxide dismutase, or SOD. And there's 3 different types of SOD. One is specific to the mitochondria, but it's extremely important in controlling inflammation and oxidative stress. And that's really the first step in healing anything. And so a lot of times, people will start like a harsh detox, or, they'll start killing different pathogens they may have, either systemically or in the gut. And that just increases their inflammation. They have that low level baseline inflammation. and they just increase it. But what you really want to do is calm the inflammation down so that you can go about and address things properly without experiencing a huge exacerbation of symptoms.
Awesome. Awesome. And guys, just so you know, I mean, because I know we've talked about this in the group. I've had lots of questions about Protandim. And, I don't recommend a ton of supplements. Tim does a lot of lab work with people, so he recommends probably more because he'll recommend it's very specific to the, what the person's going through. But one of the reasons I love Protandim and recommend it to almost everyone is because all these things that Tim's explaining, the mitochondrial, oxidative stress, protecting the cells. Protandim has now 22 or 24 peer-reviewed published studies that shows that it protects the cell. It helps with phase 2 liver detox. Like we said, it increases glutathione, so that increases detoxification and increases brain protection. It increases these other antioxidant enzymes, catalase and SOD that we've mentioned. It also has curcumin in it, which is very anti-inflammatory. And it's what's called the NRF2 activator. So, Tim did a great job explaining all this stuff, and Protandim has a direct, absolute causation to protect the cell in all these ways we're talking about, to lower inflammation. And I've just seen tremendous results with it. Tim, you mentioned one thing I thought that was really interesting that I don't know if everybody might have caught. You talked about how, you might have these symptoms that were not metabolic, but they became metabolic. And I think that's a very, very, very key point, because there's a lot of people who all of a sudden gain weight or have weight issues or water retention issues or inflammatory issues or whatever, but specifically metabolic, specifically weight gain. So can all these problems and this inflammation you're talking about cause weight gain? And if so, do you want to just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, and I can send you the link, or people can Google my name and Huffington Post, and I wrote an article for them about, the 5 reasons you're not losing weight. And, it's before I went back and got my doctorate, I was a personal trainer, and I would see people doing all the right things from a nutrition standpoint, an exercise standpoint, and a sleep, lifestyle hygiene standpoint, but they still weren't, losing weight. And I knew there had to be either heavy metals or other environmental chemicals involved, hormonal imbalances that, can be caused by a number of different things, gut issues, etc. But in that article, I talk about the inflammatory compounds, and you might not have heard the name, but you definitely have experienced how they make you feel. They're called cytokines. And when you have a cold or the flu or some sort of bug and you feel bad, your symptoms are actually caused not directly by the pathogen, but by those cytokines. And those cytokines, there are ones that cause inflammation and ones that help calm down inflammation. And most of the time, we get an upregulation or too many of the pro-inflammatory cytokines that will disrupt a lot of different reactions in the body. And the reason it results in, there's several reasons why it results in a metabolic issue. But when you create inflammation, cortisol is your primary anti-inflammatory hormone, right?
Right.
So your body will release cortisol, which raises blood sugar. And then in order to address that elevated blood sugar, your body will pump out insulin, high levels of insulin, which will lead to insulin resistance. And that is how you get metabolic issues from non-metabolic causes. So the bottom line is anything that contributes to inflammation will negatively impact your ability to lose weight and change your hormonal profile. It'll not only raise cortisol and insulin, but it can impact your sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen and DHEA. So that's something important to consider. And what I tell people is that you have to get healthy to lose weight, not lose weight to get healthy.
Yep.
And I don't use that as a license to let people, just go eat whatever they want. But, if you don't balance your physiology out, nothing's going to help.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that info. And so Tim, I got one or two questions for you, and then we'll see if anybody on the line has some questions, and I'll check Facebook real quick. But I really appreciate your time, man. This is fantastic
Sure.
information. You guys are lucky that we have so much access to Dr. Jackson, because his knowledge is incredible, and there's very few people, literally, there's very few people in the world who understand this stuff the way he does. Let's talk real quick about like autoimmune disease and arthritis. So guys, there's a lot of people in the group, it could be gut health related, like Crohn's or IBS or colitis or Hashimoto's thyroiditis, even fibromyalgia, things as serious as lupus or MS. Those are all like autoimmune inflammatory type conditions. And autoimmune essentially just means your body is essentially attacking itself. There's white blood cell mistakes or confusion. And so Tim, do you want to touch a little bit on how, sort of a paleo type diet or a real food diet, and then like following your protocols and these lifestyle factors, how can those things, I don't want to say cure, because we don't say cure, but we can improve the symptoms of autoimmunity. Do you want to just touch on that briefly?
Yeah. So, in terms of autoimmunity, probably a more correct term is really what one of my mentors taught me is neuroimmunity, because it affects a lot of systems in the body, but particularly the nervous system and the immune system. And one of the main causes behind these autoimmune or neuroimmune syndromes are pathogens, what we call stealth pathogens, microbes that are good at evading the immune system or tricking the immune system into turning on or mounting a response against our own tissues, things of that nature. And so for example, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, let's use that condition. One of the most common pathogens connected with that is the Epstein-Barr virus. And I won't get into the details or specifics, but basically it tricks your immune system through a process called molecular mimicry to attack your body's own tissue. Okay. And so that's the Epstein-Barr virus. There's a gut bug called Yersinia that can also cause the same thing. So anytime you have any sort of issue like MS, Parkinson's, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, you want to always look at what the immune system's doing and what pathogens someone has. And this can be a topic for another webinar, but most doctors, even most of the integrative and functional doctors I know, don't know how to read or interpret tests that are measuring your immune system's response or activity against a certain pathogen. And so it gets dismissed. And that's a huge mistake, because it lies, at the heart of these autoimmune or neuroimmune issues. And again, I'll give you a musculoskeletal example. They found the antigen antibody complexes, which is our immune system just binding to the pathogen or its toxins in the knees of people with osteoarthritis for a certain pathogen or microbe called mycoplasma. Mycoplasma, if you haven't heard of it, it's a cell wall deficient bacteria. So what that means is most of the time antibiotics work by breaking up or destroying the cell membrane. Well, if the cell doesn't have a membrane or cell wall, then it's a lot harder to kill. And so that's why, it's referred to as a cell wall deficient pathogen. And so, what I can tell you is that, again, like you said, we can't use the word cure. I can tell you that people's autoimmune markers improve. And again, the timing is going to depend on how many pathogens you have, your hormonal status, what type of diet you've been eating for however long. But definitely, have to look at the pathogens that are present, along with not just the systemic pathogens, but the gut pathogens, and also the integrity of the gut lining. So, It's very common for people to have some degree of leaky gut from eating, a diet that's not the best for them. Maybe it's too high in high glycemic carbs or something like that, or some other issue that's going on. And if you have certain pathogens present, the molecules that they produce irritate your gut lining. And so you can take things to heal the gut lining, but if you don't get rid of the pathogens, you're going to constantly be dealing with a leaky gut. And so, that's important, to focus on, to make sure that you're healing the gut lining, not just with food and bone broth, but by doing a proper stool analysis and determining, what pathogens you have. And the reason that's important is because some microbes respond to very, kind of broad spectrum modalities, whereas other microbes may require very specific nutrients or antimicrobials.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And so when you work with a patient, you're going to obviously recommend blood testing for antibodies, but probably the key one would be a stool test. Is that fair to say, or?
Well, yeah, I tell everyone that I have kind of a hierarchy. If you took psychology, you remember, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And for my male patients, I tell them, you can't have an erection running from a tiger. And what I mean by that is, when you have all these stressors, your body's going to prioritize addressing those over anything else. So that's why when you have something like the flu, you don't have much of a libido. Your body's trying to conserve energy. If you want the $64,000 term, it's cytokine-induced sickness behavior. But it's your body's way of just kind of conserving energy and devoting it towards, healing the issue at hand. And I'm sorry, what was the last thing you asked me?
Yeah, just you gave some fantastic examples, and I think you and I both know that people's physicians are not running these tests properly for the most part. I mean,
yes, testing.
Yeah, just testing and stool testing specifically. I know they've got to get very specific, and that's
yeah.
And
I'm able to, I've been through the gamut, not only myself as a patient, but with clients, and I see people spending a lot of money on tests that have been shown to be inaccurate. So I'm able to save people thousands of dollars by, telling them which tests have been shown to be bogus and which tests are legitimate. As far as, if someone has an autoimmune issue and they came to me, usually no matter what they come to me with, I'm going to start with the stool test, because most people that have gut issues, it's not going to usually manifest as a gut symptom. It may manifest as brain fog or fatigue or forgetfulness or joint pain. And so, there's a lot of people that fight me on it, but when they get the test results back, they're really happy they did it, because they find out, there are these imbalances, and, it's empowering. I tell people it's not to scare you. Knowledge is power. And it's to arm you with the right information and educate you on how to address it. And so a stool test, it's called a PCR, a stool test, which means the testers just use a DNA probe to determine the presence of good bacteria as well as pathogenic bacteria, yeast, and even certain viruses. It'll also measure inflammatory markers in the gut, whether you're absorbing fat well enough or not, how well is your secretory IgA, which is your first line of defense in your mucous membranes. And that's something that Candida actually splits in half. So that makes your gut, more prone to leaky gut and susceptible to damage. But as far as testing for the specific pattern or pathogens, that would usually come afterwards, because I tell people, no matter what we're trying to achieve, your gut's got to be optimal and the adrenals and thyroid have to be optimal. From there, the testing will differ a little bit depending on the person. But, I like to look at the adrenals and the thyroid side by side, because, sometimes people might have suboptimal thyroid issues that can be corrected by optimizing the adrenals. And again, adrenal fatigue, we won't get into that, but let's just say it's a misnomer. Your adrenals don't just, get tired. It's these stressors, whether it's a gut bug or environmental toxicity or staying up too late or financial worries that are stressing your adrenals. Pathogens as well, anything that creates inflammation in the body, any type of inflammation or any level of inflammation will interfere with those functions. So the adrenals will get taxed by any of those. And so I only use the adrenal stress index to look and say, okay, you need to support yourself at this time and this time of the day, in the short term. But our long-term goal has to be to reduce your total body burden, TBV, total body burden or total body load. And, if you don't do those things, then the other things don't work. So if I just skip those initial steps and try to start killing pathogens, well, if your thyroid's not optimal, your body temperature drops. When your body temperature drops just a tad, your immune function drops significantly. And so that's why you really have to understand the connections, and you can't just, say, oh, okay, you have this pathogen, let's kill that. Or you have MTHFR, let's just take methylfolate and B12. It's usually not that simple.
Right. Awesome. Fantastic. All right, Tim, I think we have one question that somebody typed in here in the chat. You touched on it a little bit, and I know this is super complicated, but maybe just kind of give your short explanation of how, the gut brain connection, essentially. Their question was, how can you expand on how gut health can affect, the brain or neurological issues?
Yeah. So one of them is something I mentioned earlier, where when you have certain types of pathogenic bacteria or yeast or other parasites or microbes in the gut, it releases those toxins into the bloodstream, which causes a huge inflammatory response. And if that inflammatory response goes on long enough, those inflammatory molecules, those cytokines that I mentioned, punch holes in the blood-brain barrier. And it turns on a type of cell called the microglial cells, which is the resident white blood cells in the brain, in the central nervous system. And those cells are not meant to be turned on for very long periods of time. And when they are, you start to get excitotoxicity, which may present as anxiety or depression, and brain fog or memory issues, and neurodegeneration. So, you have those inflammatory molecules activating the white blood cells in the brain, which then release certain harmful compounds that further damage the brain. And one is called quinolinic acid. And I bring it up because one of probably the most potent nutraceutical or ingredient out there that can lower it is curcumin. It directly lowers that quinolinic acid. The other ways that it can directly affect it is that your most of your serotonin, about 85 to 90%, is produced in the gut. Other ways that can be affected are the absorption and metabolism of proteins. So proteins get broken down into amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks of your neurotransmitters. Okay? And then another important way is that you can have certain bacteria in the gut, certain species of Clostridia. Their metabolites can hijack an enzyme that depletes your neurotransmitters or your neurotransmitter stores of tryptophan. And so you can see there that there's a pathogen connection where they actually hack into this neurotransmitter system. We call it the nervous endocrine immune super system, and interfere with what neurotransmitters are being made. And, nutrient deficiencies can affect, what's being produced. Certain pathogens, usually in the initial stages, you'll see all the neurotransmitters will be high across the board. And then later on, it's kind of like with cortisol, they'll all be low. But what will usually happen is that one or two will become elevated due to microbes. And then in order to try and balance everything out, the body will raise the other ones, the other neurotransmitters. And so, that there's several ways, 3 or 4 ways that I gave you that the gut can affect the brain. Trying to think, another one is by negatively impacting mitochondrial function. And so when we talk about, having bacteria in the gut, most of what we're talking about 98%, is in the large intestines or colon. Your small intestines should be relatively sterile, okay? And that's where your absorption of fats, proteins, and carbs occurs. And if you have constipation or your body's not producing sufficient bile, what can happen is the bacteria from the large intestines, they can move up into the small intestines. And that's what we call SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And that can wreak havoc on the body because, number one, it's going to interfere with your nutrient absorption, your macro and micronutrients. But two, it can release the bacteria involved in SIBO can release compounds that will interfere with your mitochondria. And remember, I described the mitochondria as the battery packs of your cells, and they're extremely important. Different, depending on the types of tissue we're talking about, certain organs will have more than others. You'll typically see mitochondrial issues show up in the nervous system first. And so these lipopolysaccharides that can come from gram-negative bacteria, just one potential pathogen or category of pathogens, and a gas called hydrogen sulfide that comes from certain sulfate-reducing bacteria will interfere with your mitochondria and affect all the systems of the body, particularly the nervous system.
Wow, that's fantastic information. And guys, again, Dr. Tim mentioned curcumin, and a lot of people who take Protandim has curcumin in it. It's the most potent ingredient in it, and I shouldn't say potent. I should say it's highest concentration. So the largest amount of the 5 ingredients is curcumin, and it also has ashwagandha in it, which is an adaptogenic herb. So a lot of people who take that notice a good improvement in neurological or depression or anxiety, things like that. So that's the mechanism there that, Dr. Tim talked about. So Tim, this stuff is amazing. You're amazing. We really appreciate you. I got one more question, then we'll see if we got a couple of these I'm asking you from the chat.
Okay.
And guys, this is recorded, just so you know. It is absolutely recorded. You're going to have to listen to it twice probably to grasp all the amazing knowledge that's included. Now, you can, this is kind of a controversial one. I've never asked you this, I don't think. I think I know your answer, but and feel free to, politically correct it or not. I don't care. But the question is about vaccines. I knew that
was going to be it.
Yeah. This is going to be, you don't have to say, answer it however you want, but I'm just asking you, this could be like a freaking 7-day seminar to try to just dissect the vaccines alone. But what are kind of some of your initial thoughts or things that you would suggest people consider when it comes to vaccines?
Well, I try to always surround myself with people smarter than I am. And, there's a guy, he's a neurosurgeon, a board-certified neurosurgeon who taught where I got my doctorate. His name's Dr. Russell Blaylock, and he also wrote a book on excitotoxins. And it was about that time they told him, he pretty much needed to leave. And he got cast off as a quack. The guy's a board-certified neurosurgeon. And then he started talking about the negative, potentially negative effects or impact of vaccines. And he has a little protocol that involves liposomal glutathione, vitamin C that you give to kids, before the vaccine. The issue is, so a lot of times the discussion centers around autism. Okay.
Sure.
People are always looking, like I mentioned before, for one thing to be causing, their issue. And it's never just one thing. That's why there are kids in the Amish community who have not been vaccinated who have autism, because there are other factors that contribute. What happens is this, There are, based on the studies, I think they looked at 8 or 9 different large U.S. cities. The average umbilical cord of a newborn has between 250 and 300 known carcinogens. Okay, but those are, the baby's already immunosuppressed. Then just look at how many kids are born via C-section, how many are put on antibiotics at an early age, how many aren't breastfed, and the gestational period and then the first 3 to 4 years of life are incredibly important from every angle. But if you and I get injected with a virus or some heavy metals, we're a little bit better equipped to handle that. Well, the blood-brain barrier that I talked about before, that doesn't get fully formed until around 4 to 5 years of age. And so what's happening, and this gets into, I mentioned it when we were talking about the food component, Roundup or glyphosate. And this is well researched and documented. The doctor is Dr. Stephanie Seneff. She's from MIT, which I don't know how she hasn't gotten fired yet, but she studies the stuff and has hardcore data on it, showing that glyphosate, which now, there's you've probably seen some of the discussions back and forth. Well, is gluten really the issue, or is it more the glyphosate? Well, it's probably a combination of both, but we do know that the glyphosate works together with aluminum, which is in vaccines and in our supply, food and water supply. And those two act synergistically to disrupt your entire microbiome, as well as your phase 1 and 2 detox pathways, and a whole bunch of other functions. So the vaccines, the issue is this. If you look at how many we're giving so close together, it doesn't make any logical or biological sense, even if you're not in the medical field. I'll give you an example. When I worked in North Carolina, I had a little girl who was vaccinated when she had, I think, 101 or 102 degree fever.
Ugh.
And the pediatrician didn't even get in trouble. You don't need to be in the medical field to know you don't give someone a vaccine when they're already running a fever. And this little girl had permanent nystagmus, which is, when your eyes are crossed, and she cried incessantly. And the pediatrician didn't even receive a warning or anything. Another, lady that I met, her daughter, just a few hours after getting the MMR, had a stroke. Okay. And you can have a reaction that's immediate to the vaccines, and you'll see, kids start to regress or act differently and behave differently. But you can also have a completely different reaction that occurs later on in life. That's an autoimmune disorder or a neuroimmune disorder. Okay. And so the bottom line is, when you have someone who's immunosuppressed, and that doesn't even count the metals that get dumped from mom's, blood supply to the baby, along with other pathogens, because these viruses and things like HHV6, Epstein-Barr, they get transferred from, via the placenta from mother to baby. And so their immune systems are already stressed. And then they don't want to compromise and have them do a delayed schedule. Like, I know several MDs who, they say that, well, it's mostly the number of vaccines that we're giving, and we're giving them too close together. So they'll, write a prescription or a requisition for the child to have a delayed schedule. And something's obviously funny, or something funny is going on, because they'll go to the health department and they'll say, nope, we're not doing that. You get them all at once, or you're not getting them at all, which doesn't make any sense. It goes against all the science that we know.
Right.
And people think that there aren't any studies showing that vaccines negatively influence your physiology. There's a ton. There's one in particular called Adversonomics, and what it involves is looking at genetic polymorphisms, like I mentioned earlier, and how they may predispose certain children to vaccine reactions. For example, the lower your levels of glutathione, or the lower the levels of glutathione that the baby has, the more likely they are to negatively react to the vaccine. The more impaired their methylation pathways, which are your, B vitamin, methylfolate pathways, more impaired those are, the more likely you are to react. So, there's a number of variables at play here. But I can't remember the name of the book off the top of my head. I think it was last year or the year before. Harvard immunologist came out and published a book, and she examined, the data on vaccines, and she lays it out pretty clearly that a lot of the things we attribute vaccines to achieving really came from increased sanitation. And, there are tons of I know tons of MDs that don't vaccinate, themselves or their kids, or if they do, they order the adjuvant free, because pediatricians, someone was telling me, I can't remember the number, so I don't want to say it, but they get a pretty good chunk of change for each kid that's fully vaccinated. That's why they will fire you from their practice if you don't do the full vaccine schedule.
Wow.
And, it usually takes, unfortunately, someone in their immediate family or extended family to have a reaction to a vaccine for them to, come around and really look at the science. When it came out that Dr. Wakefield, Dr. Wakefield was the guy that, everyone persecuted and said that he said MMR vaccines cause autism. Actually, he didn't say that at all. Here's what he said. He was doing a study on doing intestinal biopsies of children with autism. And all he said was that there's an extremely high percentage of them that have the MMR vaccine in their gut tissue. He didn't say MMR causes autism. He just said that a lot of his kids with autism that he was seeing had that. And, it's been shown over and over again as well. If you look at the actual studies that are done and not the ones that are, fixed from the beginning, I mean, most of them they have set up that, it's going to show what they want to show, from the get-go, instead of revealing, the actual data. So, I have friends that are MDs that, they do a delayed schedule, and I have some that don't vaccinate at all. My thing is this, I mean, if they're spread way out and, for example, hepatitis B, it's a sexually transmitted issue. Why are we vaccinating newborn infants for that?
Right. Right.
And my question always comes back to, if vaccines are so effective, then why are you so worried about it?
Right.
People can't rationalize. Maybe they've had too much brain damage from their own vaccines.
Right. Right. Oh, that's great information. And there's like a docu-series or some new thing I've seen some of our colleagues promoting about vaccines.
Yeah.
Have you checked? I haven't seen it yet, but
I think it's Vaccine Information Revealed or something.
Yeah.
If I see it, I'll post it in the group.
Okay, cool. And guys, as always, nothing that we're saying is intended to treat, prevent, cure anything. This is not intended to be medical advice. We're just sharing information, and Dr. Tim's sharing information. We're not, this doesn't replace the relationship that you have with your doctor. We're not telling you what to do. We appreciate his knowledge, and I think you guys would want to know. You guys want to know this stuff, so we're sharing it. Tim, one last one I have here from the group, and guys, again, we're super lucky to have Tim for this long. We've already kept him on here for over an hour, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I think we got one final question that I see in the chat. And it's she says 3 years ago she had Giardia. Ever since then, she's had C. diff. Wow, every 6 months. Is this related? And if so, how can I stop
had what
it?
Every 6 months?
It says she's had C. diff every 6 months.
Okay.
So yeah, so she's just asking if this is related, and then if so, how can I stop it? And she said she's taking a probiotic.
Yeah, well, so that's where, I would have to see a stool test. It can certainly be related. what can happen is when you don't have enough of the good bacteria, there's plenty of space for the bad bacteria to come on board, right?
Right.
And so that is a common scenario. But other types of pathogens can cause loose stools. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, like we were talking about earlier, can cause that. But you want to get a PCR DNA stool test. I use DRG Labs. They're based out of Georgia. And I think the amount, if insurance doesn't pay anything, I think it's $350, but that's actually pretty cheap compared to some of the others, and it's well worth the information. What can happen too is certain microbes in the gut will split what's called your secretory IgA. So our immune systems make immunoglobulins. They're just proteins that protect us from microbes and pathogens in the environment. And the IgA version of the immunoglobulin can get cut in half or sliced open by different microbes, especially Candida. And when SIgA or secretory IgA, when that's on the lower end, that allows plenty of room for pathogens to come back. So that's when you read in these groups, I killed it off, but it came back. That's because they're not what we call rebooting their secretory IgA. And secretory IgA is directly impacted by your adrenal health. So your cortisol to DHEA sulfate ratio will determine if your SIgA is optimal or not, in large part. And so that's why, again, it's another web-like connection that you can't just go in and kill, the microbes. You have to look at hormonal levels, systemic inflammation, methylation, those sorts of things.
Awesome. Great info. And I don't know if you guys are ready for this. I think we might have talked about it in in another one of the interviews that I'll share with you guys. But especially if you've had C. diff, I would say, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably a great candidate for a fecal matter transplant, and that might be a little too heavy for some of you guys to take. But no,
I think you're right on with that. That's actually the one approved use of it.
Yeah.
By the FDA.
And so whoever asked that question, I won't share your name because I don't know if you want to keep it private, but definitely look into what's called FMT, fecal matter transplant. It sounds gross. It sounds crazy, but it's amazing. And Dr. Jackson's a great expert on it too. Dr. Tim, you are the man, buddy. Like, really, really appreciate it. This is fantastic information. I don't think you guys realize how lucky you are to have access to this guy. Tell us, as we wrap up here, when you work with somebody, you generally work with them for a longer period of time. Just tell people, like, if somebody's interested in doing some private work with you, do you want to just tell them a little bit about what that would look like?
Yeah, so what I found in my first year and a half of practice was that, I would end up overwhelming clients during my first consultation or first appointment. And it was coming from a good place. I wanted them to feel like they were getting their money's worth, but they would walk out just feeling overwhelmed. And then, they really wouldn't take action on any of the items. And then they would kind of just bounce around from doctor to doctor, maybe do one consult with this doctor, one consult with another one. So I found that by developing longer term programs, because, as we discussed, every health issue has multiple layers. And if you think that we're going to fix it with just one consultation, that's really not doing your body justice, because your body is very complex. But the main program I have is called the Heal Your Body program. And you get an initial 1 hour to an hour and a half consult, 4 45-minute follow-ups, 1 20-minute wrap-up at the end, and 15 emailed questions. And we can customize a program for you as well, because I have some clients that really just want to know everything they can, and they'll use up most of their consults within the first 3 months, and that's fine. But if you want to email me, you can message me on Facebook, or go to my website, healyourbody.org, or if you want to write down, or Terry, if you can post my email, it's lowercase Dr. Tim, DRTIM, and then the number 072981@gmail.com. So again, that's Dr. Tim 072981@gmail.com.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so I've just found that over the years that my results have gotten better and better as, I have worked with people longer, because we're able to, peel away the layers of the onion, so to speak.
Definitely. And guys, and if you've had previous lab work, obviously Dr. Tim could look at that. He probably would help you order new proper lab work, because what I found is a lot of times you might not even have the proper lab work that you need. But Tim, again, man, I can't thank you enough. I appreciate you so much. You've been a great friend and mentor to me, and I really appreciate you sharing this with the group. Guys, Tim's in the Facebook group, so if you have a question, you can definitely post it there. And he gave his contact information, and if you need more information, just ask him in there, and he's welcome to post it. But Tim, I think we'll wrap it up there, man. I think you've filled our brains with as much functional medicine as we can possibly take in one day, and we really appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Well, I enjoyed it. You guys don't hesitate if you have questions to reach out to me. Even if you're interested in seeing someone in person, maybe be able to connect you with someone in your area. Or if you're willing to work long distance, I'd be happy to help out, or refer you to someone closer.
Absolutely. And Tim, we didn't say this, but you're in South Carolina, correct?
I am.
Okay, perfect. You're in South Carolina, but the work you do is remote, so they can be via Skype or phone.
Yeah, I have clients in Thailand, the UK, United Arab Emirates, Canada, you name it, New Zealand.
Awesome. You're a global functional medicine practitioner. We love
I'm trying to, man.
Awesome. Well, Tim, hey, thanks a lot, man. We'll wrap this thing up. We'll see everybody in the Facebook group. Guys, thanks for your time. Thanks for checking this out. Tim, thank you, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.